So I wonder if any of you remember those halcyon days when you would enter a cafe or a bar and it would be full of people. Go on, stretch your mind back. I'm sure you can trawl up from your memory something of that. Everywhere you looked, people were talking to each other, and your ears got washed by a kind of sea of disconnected words. Well, that's how Isaiah 40 opens. We enter a new scene in the book, 150 years after Isaiah 39, after the first part, and we are greeted by a host of voices. We're not so much invited into a conversation as assailed by a cacophony of sounds, all of whom are seeking our attention. Verses 1 to 2. Verses 3 to 5, the first part of verse 6, verse 6b to 7, verse 8, and verse 9 to 11. Maybe 5 or 6 speakers, all clamoring for our attention. And at the heart of this is the voice that we hear in verse 6b and 7. The voice that says, in response to someone saying, "Cry out!" The voice replies, "What shall I cry? All people are like grass, and their faithfulness like the flowers of the field. The grass withers, and the flowers fall, because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are like grass." The voice in verse 6b and 7 is the voice of everyone who feels that God, frankly, has paid them just a little bit too much attention, and he would now like God to leave them alone. He's like Job in chapter 7. What are human beings that you make so much of them, that you set your mind on them, that you visit them every morning, test them every moment? Will you not look away from me for a while? Will you let me alone for a moment so I can spit? And the voice in Isaiah 40, verse 6, is a voice like that one. It's a voice like Debbie, whom I met when we were church planting in Peckham a long time ago, who said to me, "I can't believe in him up there because of what's happened to me down here." And out came a whole string of the stuff that had been visited on her life. Men, the council, kids, life in general, grinding poverty. Or people like Jack, no dad, not much mum, very bad choices in his 20 or so years, reluctantly in our night shelter because it was just marginally preferable to sleeping in the snow. "But," he said, "don't talk to me about God. I've had enough in my life." Expletive deleted. Or like Colin, ad sales executive on the last paper I worked for. We sat next to each other at a Christmas party. Colin was gay, disabled, and HIV positive. And as Christmas present, he gave me a mug that I still use that says, "There is still no cure for AIDS." I wished him a happy Christmas and told him what I'd be doing. And he said he didn't do Christmas because nothing good happens in the world, and God was not as useful to him as his crutch was, which I think was a veiled reference to my God being a crutch for me. Sadly, Colin didn't live to see another Christmas. The prophet puts into words what many people feel. There is no good news. Look around you. All people are frail and fragile, and God keeps blowing them over like the scorching wind that blows in the Judean desert in the summer. And too often the source of this lashing wind is the church, God's would-be mouthpiece, which snipes and snarls about lifestyles and choices and things that people do without really understanding what it's like to walk a yard or two in the shoes of those we are addressing. The prophet who opens this collection of wonderful words in Isaiah chapter 6 He volunteered to take the message of judgment to people who won't pay any attention to it. But the prophet in this section does not want that gig. The voice in verse 6 is certainly aware of what's gone before. Don't send me with a message like that, a message of the scorching wind that blows people away. Don't send me with a word of judgment. But his voice is not the only voice we hear in Isaiah 40. There are other voices clamoring for our attention and suggesting that God has something altogether different in mind in calling to us. So Isaiah 40 opens with an invitation to listen, to tune in to the voices echoing around us, voices of dislocation and disillusion, to tune into our own voice, which is maybe feeling fragile and uncertain. And in all of that, to find God's voice. There is a searing honesty in this opening section of the poem. Isaiah 40 to 55 is a single poem that unfolds its message of hope slowly and subtly and slightly slyly to its audience. There is at the beginning of it a telling it like it is, telling God how we really feel. Here are people languishing in exile, far from home, mourning the loss of family, of livelihoods, of good times with friends, of fixed points in their lives. People who would say just a little later in the chapter, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my God, my right is disregarded by my God. God doesn't care about us. He's forgotten us. He's written us off. People like our neighbors. And so Isaiah 40 is the great Advent text. It's where all Advents should begin. It's where the journey starts. Because Advent is about a clearing of the decks. It's about bringing out into the open everything that upsets and unsettles us in the world. It's about our lives. It's about God. It's about a time of being blown by the scorching wind of God so that we might be stripped of all the rubbish in our lives, so that we might be ready to receive comfort and forgiveness and solace and strength for the journey. A voice cries out in verses 3 and 4 of Isaiah 40, a voice that gets picked up at the start of Mark's gospel as John the Baptist blazes a trail for Jesus to arrive with a message of the coming kingdom, of a new world order, a world of peace and justice. Something is stirring in all these voices. God is on the move, speaking comfort, sweeping into the lives of the unsettled, of the broken and the forgotten. And Advent is a time when we get ready for that voice. It's a time of preparation for Christmas. It's not about dusting off the decorations, although we did a bit of that yesterday. It's not about sorting out our present wish list, although I'm sure we've all done a little bit of that. And it's not about queuing outside Primark for the season's must-have onesie that apparently everybody is queuing for. Advent is about standing stripped by the wind of God, ready for God himself to arrive on that highway, being prepared for him, that the prophet, the voice, speaks of in verses 3 to 5. A voice says, God is coming. The voice has heard him, stirring up the nations, fomenting the rise of Cyrus in neighboring Persia and the changes in the global political landscape that will eventually lead these exiles to go home. God is still coming. Whatever's going on in the world at large, things that are welcome, things we wish were gone so that everything can get back to normal, God is still coming. He is coming to break chains and set people free from sin and its all too visible consequences: debt and poverty and illness and poor education and unemployment and violence and injustice. And we've seen rather too much of that this past week, this past month, this past year. We need God to come and make everything new. And he is coming, says the voice. But God is also comforting. He's not coming with the big stick of Isaiah 6. He's coming with the comforting arms of Isaiah 40, verse 1 and verse 11. He knows our pain, and he longs to gather us into his arms like a mum sweeping up her child. He knows what the voice of verse 6 knows. He knows we are weak and frail. He knows that we won't be able to stand another blast of the hot wind. He knows that we've used up all our spare energy just getting through lockdown, just getting through what life has thrown at us this year. He knows how frail we are, how worn out we are. And the last thing we need, he knows, is God turning up with a pep talk and a call to action. He knows that we need him to come and to wrap us in his arms and say, enough. That's enough. Which is what the voice says in verse 1 and 2. It's enough. You've suffered enough. It's time for solace and comfort. And because this is how God comes to us, it is how we are called to go and draw alongside our wounded and hurting neighbours. In God's name, bringing his comfort and pointing to the light on the horizon. Because God is coming and God is comforting, but he is also calling. He is seeking relationship with us. But sometimes we are deaf to that. And so he gets up on a high mountain and he calls out that he is coming and he is seeking relationship. And he doesn't do it through a lecture or a sermon, as the wonderful Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament scholar, says. Finally comes the poet, and God speaks through this amazing poem. Language that burrows deep into the heart of who we are and who he is. For in Advent, God wants us to change how we feel about him and about ourselves. So there's no new theology here. There's no fresh revelation. Just a reminder of the old stuff, especially the Exodus, with its memory of a journey to freedom and new life. God is reminding us that we are his and he is ours, and that he loves us and that he will not leave us to face this on our own. And so as we walk into the cafe or the bar where we were meeting mates with all its clamoring voices, we also hear the sound system playing wonderful music. In particular, the wonderful Deacon Blue Christmas song of 2 or 3 years ago, where Ricky Ross sings, "You'll know it's Christmas when the snows are beginning." He lives in Scotland. And someone's singing a song. And a bit later he sings, "If there's a star in the sky, if the air is filled with the mystery, if there's a babe in the church with a choir, you'll know it's Christmas. If there's love in this world, if there is something worth struggling for, if there's someone you're holding close, you'll know it's Christmas." Really, what Ricky Ross captures in his rather sly and subtle way is the spirit of Advent. Advent is the invitation for us to get ready to meet God in the things that we think worth struggling for, in the people that we do hold close to ourselves. In Advent, we get ready to welcome our God, not as a conquering king, but as a baby in a manger, with the echo of choirs of angels at the center of an ordinary family's celebration of new life and hope for a better future. Advent is our invitation to tune into the voice, the only voice that matters among all the other voices clamoring for our attention. And as Ricky Ross sings in a different Christmas song, the B-side to the one I've just quoted, I can't carry you. You've got to make your own way there. This boy, the child in the manger, belongs to you. Move a little closer. Don't be scared. What better invitation do you need to tune in to the Advent voice that really matters?